We were 29 years married, nearly 3 decades of shared holidays, inside jokes, routine dinners, and quiet evenings folding laundry side by side. The kind of marriage where things settle more than spark, and where love looks like habit instead of poetry. So when I forgot our anniversary, I didn't expect fireworks. I figured he'd grumble, maybe withdraw into his newspaper for a few days, and I'd make it up with his favorite casserole and an extra kind tone. That's how we worked. Soft bruises, slow healing. But I didn't expect what came next. He didn't sulk. He didn't scold. Instead, he handed me a small, wrapped box with a note inside, one that unraveled 29 years of assumptions in just a few quiet lines. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't romantic. It was something far more devastating. And that night, while I sat on the edge of our bed, holding that gift like a mirror to everything I hadn't seen, I realized the biggest mistake wasn't forgetting the date. It was forgetting us. We met in 1993 in a laundromat off a side street in Des Moines. I had just started grad school. He was finishing his apprenticeship as an electrician. He offered me a quarter when I couldn't break $1 for the machines, and we ended up talking for an hour while our clothes spun side by side. He was quiet, even then. Thoughtful. Not the type to charm with words, but with presence. He listened. When I spoke, really listened. I hadn't known how rare that was until I had it. By the third date, he showed up at my apartment with a toolbox, not flowers, and fixed the faulty kitchen light I'd been complaining about. That's how I knew. This man didn't just hear my words, he wanted to lighten my load. We married in a small chapel surrounded by trees, attended by 47 people, and an old uncle who insisted on singing off-key during the processional. I wore a dress my mother had sewn, and he wore the same brown shoes he wore to work, freshly, polished. It was simple, honest, us. Over the years, our love didn't grow louder, it grew steadier. We bought a modest home on the edge of town, had 2 boys who are now grown men with lives of their own, and settled into a rhythm that felt predictable in the best way. Morning coffee, lawn care, Sunday dinners, bills and budgets, the occasional weekend away. We were, by all accounts, doing fine. And somewhere along the way, I started measuring our marriage by the absence of problems. No affairs, no screaming matches, no dramatic exits. I told myself that meant we were lucky. But what I didn't realize was that no problems isn't the same as being present. That comfort, when left unchecked, becomes distance. A numbness too quiet to notice until it's too far gone to reverse in one conversation. The week of our anniversary, I was buried in work. Deadlines, client calls, back-to-back meetings. I didn't check the calendar. I didn't sense any buildup. Just another Thursday, I thought. Until that evening, when he came home early. He was freshly shaven, in the dark navy sweater I'd bought him last Christmas and nearly forgotten. He held a small white box in his hand. And I, standing there, in yoga pants reheating leftover stew, blinked. "What's this?" I asked, confused. He didn't answer right away. He just set the box on the table between us. "It's our anniversary," he said. 30 years today. I felt a pit open in my stomach. "Oh," I breathed, the guilt sweeping in too fast to catch. "It's okay," he interrupted. "Open it." And when I did, the world tilted. The box was small, about the size of a paperback book, and wrapped carefully in plain white paper with a single gold ribbon. I recognized his handwriting immediately on the tag. For Ellen. There was something almost childlike about the way it was packaged, not flashy, not ceremonial, just simple, deliberate. I peeled back the paper, slowly. Inside was a navy blue leather journal, the kind I used to carry when we were first married. My breath caught. I hadn't kept one in years. But this wasn't new. It was worn, its corners softened, the edges faintly frayed. I opened the front cover. There, in his handwriting, dated back to our first anniversary, was a single sentence. Year 1. You made pancakes this morning and sang along to James Taylor while the syrup burned. I loved that. I blinked. I turned the page. Year 2. You cried watching the boys in the park and said you hoped one day we'd have our own. I loved your softness. And so it went. Every year, one entry, one sentence, sometimes two, a memory, a detail, a moment I had long forgotten, but he hadn't. Year 7. You sat with my mother in the hospital when I couldn't bear to. She smiled more with you than with me. I noticed that. Year 12. You kissed me at the gas station in front of strangers. I felt young again. Year 18. You held my hand under the table when we got the bad news about your dad. I didn't have the words, but your hand said everything. I flipped quickly, my eyes now burning. I reached the most recent page. Year 30. This entry was longer. You forgot this year. That's okay. I know work has been heavy, and the boys don't call as much, and you don't sing in the mornings anymore. But I remember. I remember all of it. I love you still. Even when you forget, I remember enough for both of us. I closed the journal. Carefully, afraid to damage the weight of it. He stood there, quiet, letting me absorb it all. I looked up at him. His eyes weren't accusing. They were tender. I never knew you kept this, I whispered. He shrugged. Didn't feel like something I needed to show. Until today. Until today. The shame I felt was deep, but so was the wonder. For 30 years, he had written a love story I never knew I was still living in. While I counted tasks, responsibilities, and obligations, he had counted moments. Tender, fleeting, holy moments. I'm sorry, I said finally. I know, he replied, but I didn't give it to make you feel bad. I just thought, maybe you'd want to remember again. And he left me there with the journal, the dinner still unheated, the kitchen lights soft above me. He didn't ask for anything in return, just gave me the quiet truth. I didn't sleep that night. The journal sat on my nightstand, like a witness, unassuming, leather-bound, but heavy with truth I hadn't seen coming. My husband slept beside me, breathing softly, back turned, as he always did. But that night, I realized I didn't know what he was turning away from, me, or just the weight of all the years I had slowly begun to forget. I lay awake wondering how many other moments I'd let slide past me. How many quiet kindnesses had I received without acknowledgement? How many smiles had I failed to return because I was too tired, too busy, too distracted? The next morning, I packed the journal into my work bag, not because I planned to read it again that day, but because I couldn't bear to leave it behind. It felt sacred now, like something I should have cherished all along. At the office, everything felt the same. Emails, meetings, deadlines, but I wasn't the same. Every polite interaction reminded me of the intimacy I had neglected. I smiled at clients, colleagues, the building receptionist, all while thinking he was doing the emotional labor. I was just surviving. At lunchtime, I found myself at a small cafe instead of my usual desk. I pulled the journal out, flipping again to random years. Year 15. You bought me new work boots without asking for size. You just knew. I felt seen. Year 22. We danced in the kitchen while spaghetti boiled over. I didn't care about the mess. The entries weren't grand. They were ordinary. But in his eyes, they were worth writing down. That's what struck me most. He hadn't just remembered anniversaries. He remembered me. And I had stopped remembering him. The weight of it grew heavier as the days passed. I came home earlier. That week, made his favorite dinner without occasion. I ironed the shirt he always chose, but never asked me to tend. I tried, subtly, quietly, to give back what he'd given me without fanfare for 3 decades. But he noticed. You okay? he asked one night, his voice cautious, like someone testing the ice beneath their feet. "I'm trying," I said. He nodded slowly. "I don't want guilt between us. That's not what this is about." I knew that. But guilt had already entered the room, uninvited. The truth was, I had always thought I was the one holding everything together. The meals, the bills, the appointments, the lists. I mistook doing for loving. And I hadn't realized he was the one preserving the heart of our marriage, the memory, the meaning. One night, I asked him, "Why didn't you ever show me the journal before?" He took a long breath. "Because I didn't want to turn something sacred into something performative. I didn't write it so you'd praise me. I wrote it because I wanted to remember what was good. For us. For me. For later." His words hit me with the tenderness of quiet wisdom. He hadn't done it for credit. He had done it out of love. Not the kind you post about. The kind that shows up. That stays. And what had I offered in return? Calendar reminders. Tired affection. A loyal presence, yes, but rarely a present presence. For years, I had assumed we were fine because we weren't fighting. But there, in the stillness of our home, I realized we hadn't been close in a long time. And the saddest part was that he had known. He had felt the drift, and instead of resenting me, he wrote love notes to keep himself anchored, while I floated. And now the question loomed, could I find my way back? In the days that followed, I became haunted by memories, not just of the journal entries themselves, but of the moments they captured. They began resurfacing like scenes from a movie I'd watched once, but never fully appreciated. I remembered the gas station kiss he mentioned. It was raining that day, and we'd stopped to buy snacks on the way to his cousin's wedding. I'd been laughing at something he said, and he kissed me just as I stepped back toward the car. At the time, it felt spontaneous, fleeting. But it had meant something to him, enough to write it down. That realization struck me over and over. The things I had treated as casual, forgettable, even mundane, he had cherished. My daily blur was his sacred catalog. It made me ask myself questions I wasn't ready for. When did I stop looking at him across the dinner table and seeing a man I once adored? When did I start letting the years blend together instead of counting them with awe? When did I last make him feel chosen, not by routine, but by intention? I wasn't having a crisis. I didn't panic. It was reckoning with how easy it is to take love for granted when it's quiet, when it isn't demanding or dramatic, when it simply exists, faithful, gentle, waiting. And he had waited. That part nearly broke me. While I planned meals and paid bills and chased efficiency, he waited. For affection, for attention, for acknowledgement. And he never once shamed me for not giving it. That kind of patience, it doesn't come from weakness. It comes from depth, from a heart that loves beyond ego. But I had built walls around my emotions, soft ones, made of work and distraction. I convinced myself I was too tired to reach for his hand during movies, too preoccupied to leave a note in his lunch, too busy to remember the date that had started our whole life. And the more I reflected, the clearer it became. This wasn't about a forgotten anniversary. It was about how easy it is to sleepwalk through intimacy, to confuse longevity with closeness, to mistake a life with someone for a life shared with them. I began journaling myself, not to mirror what he'd done, but to understand what I had missed. I wrote down what I remembered, how his voice softened when he spoke to our kids, how he'd always keep my side of the bed slightly warmer in winter, how he touched the small of my back in grocery store lines like it was instinct. I had forgotten so much, but I hadn't lost it. Not yet. And that thought, more than anything, kept me going. Because maybe memory wasn't just something we looked back on. Maybe it was something we could rebuild, together. The following weekend, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I planned a surprise for him. not a grand gesture, not a vacation or a dinner out, just a simple evening designed with intention, something that whispered, "I see you, I remember." He had a Saturday shift at the electrical supply store where he worked part-time since his semi-retirement. While he was gone, I pulled out the old crock pot we hadn't used in years and made his mother's pot roast, the one he always said smelled like his childhood. I dusted off our wedding album, placed it on the coffee table, and pulled the curtains, just enough so the golden hour light spilled through like we used to love. I lit the candles, set the table, took off my usual hoodie and jeans, and put on a blouse I knew he liked, one I hadn't worn in ages because life had become too casual, too careless. And then I waited. When he walked in, the look on his face was one I won't forget. He paused in the doorway, taking in the flicker of candlelight, the scent of rosemary and garlic, the music playing low from the kitchen speaker. James Taylor again, just like our first year. He set down his keys slowly. "What's all this?" I smiled. I remembered. He didn't speak for a long moment, just stood there, blinking, caught somewhere between disbelief and something deeper. Gratitude, maybe. Longing. Hope. We ate together quietly, but not uncomfortably. He told me about his day, and I actually listened, not with half an ear while mentally listing chores, but truly, fully. After dinner, we sat on the couch and flipped through the wedding album. He laughed at how young we looked. I teased him about his oversized boutonniere, and then he pulled me close, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I missed this," he said. "I know," I whispered. There were no promises made, no emotional declarations, but the air between us had changed. Something long, dormant had stirred. We were no longer just coexisting, we were beginning again, in tiny, deliberate steps. That night, he reached over in bed and took my hand. And I didn't let go. It wasn't a full resolution, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, that's all love needs, a reason to hope again. For a while, things felt lighter. We began finding each other again in the quiet corners of our home, over morning coffee, in shared glances during grocery trips, in brief but intentional conversations that hadn't happened in years. It was as if we were finally seeing each other through new lenses, or maybe just cleared ones. But healing isn't linear, and even the kindest marriage has shadows. It began with an offhand comment one Tuesday night. I was going through some old storage boxes, clearing out a corner of the attic, when I stumbled across a manila folder labeled Vacation Plans, 10th Anniversary. Inside were hand-sketched itineraries, notes about Vermont inns, even clippings from travel magazines. I remembered none of it. At dinner, I brought it up lightly, smiling. "Did we actually mean to do all this for our 10th? He paused. "Yeah. You forgot, remember?" I froze. "I forgot?" He nodded gently. "You had a deadline. I didn't want to pressure you." There was no anger in his voice, just quiet recollection. But it landed harder than I expected, because now, with the clarity I'd gained, I realized this wasn't the first anniversary I had forgotten or overlooked. It had happened before. In small ways, yes, but it had become a pattern. And he had never held it against me, not openly. He had swallowed those moments whole, tucked them away, and kept loving me anyway. I felt my throat tighten. "Why didn't you say anything back then?" He smiled faintly. "I figured I didn't want to be one more thing on your plate." That was the sentence that broke me, because love shouldn't make itself small to stay. And yet, that's what he had done. For years. Not because he lacked courage, but because he loved me enough to make space for the version of me that didn't always see him. And now, even in my efforts to make things right, I was forced to face what I had long ignored, the accumulation of missed chances, forgotten gestures, and quiet sacrifices. The journal was just the tip of the iceberg. What lay beneath was a reservoir of tenderness I had never earned, but was still given. Freely. That night, after he fell asleep, I stood in the hallway staring at our framed wedding photo, noticing how young we were, how eager, how unaware of what time would ask of us. And I wondered, had I become the kind of wife I once promised I'd be? Or had I let time, ambition, and fatigue strip me of that vow? The answer wasn't simple, but the next morning, I knew one thing for certain. Healing our marriage wasn't just about remembering him. It was about remembering myself, the version of me who once looked at love and saw a life worth showing up for, every single day. The shift didn't come all at once, but like soft erosion, slow, steady, undeniable. After our dinner conversation, about the forgotten 10th anniversary, something fragile settled between us again. Not anger, not resentment, just space. That quiet kind of distance that forms when two people love each other, but truth has disrupted their rhythm. I began noticing how much he noticed. The way he'd glance at me when I reached for my reading glasses, or how he stood just a little closer when we walked down uneven sidewalks. These were things he'd probably done for years, but now I saw them, and I couldn't ignore the ache they stirred in me. Not guilty anymore, gratitude laced with grief. One Saturday morning, I told him I wanted to go somewhere. Just us. No occasion, no plan. He raised an eyebrow. Anywhere in particular? I shrugged. Somewhere we've never been, but maybe I always meant to go. He smiled a little. That narrows it down. We ended up driving to the lake, a few hours north, the one we used to talk about when the boys were young, but never had time to visit. The drive was quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't heavy, but thoughtful. We listened to the playlist from our early years, James Taylor, Simon and Garfunkel, a little Joni Mitchell, and I found myself humming again, something I hadn't done in a long time. At the lake, we sat on a bench near the water. The air was crisp. Geese floated lazily across the surface. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thermos, poured coffee for both of us, and handed me a cup. It was simple and utterly profound. I used to think, he said after a while, that love was about grand gestures. Maybe because that's what everyone talks about, anniversaries, big gifts, romantic surprises, but I don't think that's true anymore. I nodded. I think I forgot that too. He looked at me, really looked. You didn't just forget a date, Ellen. You forgot us. But the thing is, I think I did too. I just remembered it sooner. I swallowed hard. So what do we do now? We start small, he said. Like this. We sat there for a long time, not needing to fill the silence. And in that stillness, I realized something. Love that lasts doesn't thrive on moments of perfection. It lives in recovery. In choosing, again and again, the person who's already seen you fail and stays. That evening, back at home, I asked him a question I never had before. Do you want to write the next journal together? He blinked, surprised. I continued. Not just you remembering for both of us. Let's both remember. On purpose. His face softened. I'd like that. So we found an empty notebook from my desk drawer, sat down side by side, and for the first time in years, we didn't just talk about what had been. We began creating what would be. Year 31. We sat by the lake and began again. The journal now lives in the top drawer of our nightstand, beside a small lamp and a pair of reading glasses we take turns borrowing. We don't write in it every day, sometimes not even every week, but it's there, waiting, open, ours. Each new entry is different from the last. Some are long reflections about conversations we never had the courage to speak aloud until now. Others are just notes, brief, passing observations. You brought home my favorite bread without me asking. We watched the storm roll in. From the porch, and didn't say a word. You asked me about my day and actually waited for the answer. These moments aren't fireworks. They're not cinematic, but they are sacred. And for us, they're everything. Our marriage hasn't become magically perfect. We still forget to defrost the chicken. We still miscommunicate over weekend plans. But something has shifted. We've started looking at each other again, not through the lens of routine or assumption, but through attention. I've learned that love, real love, is built not just on history, but on the daily decision to witness each other. To see, to listen, to return. And I've learned that forgetting isn't always failure. Sometimes it's the beginning of remembering better. Sometimes I wonder how long my husband would have waited. If I had never noticed the journal. If I had never asked, "What's this?" Would he have carried on quietly, loving me in a language I no longer remembered how to speak? Would he have kept writing, year after year, documenting the tiny details that held our life together? The truth is, he might have, because he's that kind of man, the kind who doesn't measure love by what he receives, but by what he's willing to give. The kind who stays, not for applause, but because he made a promise and meant it. And I had taken that for granted. For years, I believed that loyalty and presence were enough. I showed up. I made dinners. I kept the house running. I didn't lie or stray or raise my voice. I thought that meant I was a good wife. And maybe on paper I was. But presence without awareness is a kind of absence too. I was there, but I wasn't with him. It took a forgotten anniversary to show me the difference. It took a man quietly recording our memories to reveal just how many I had let slip through my fingers. I had been so busy holding everything together that I hadn't noticed the parts of us gently coming apart. Now, when I reflect on the years behind us, I don't do it with shame, but with clarity. We spent so long believing marriage was about endurance. And in many ways, it is. But the most lasting marriages, I've learned, are not built merely on survival. They are built on noticing. Noticing when someone's tone shifts. Noticing when they grow quieter than usual. Noticing what matters to them, even when it seems small. We live in a world that praises grand love, anniversaries with diamonds, getaways to the coast, bold declarations posted online. But the most honest love I've ever known showed up in a small leather journal, wrapped in white paper, handed to me with no agenda. That journal reminded me that the real tragedy isn't in forgetting a date. It's in forgetting the person who never forgot you. So now, we write together. One sentence, sometimes two. A memory, a feeling, a detail. A kind of daily vow. And every time we do, I think to myself, I almost missed this. I almost missed him. But I didn't. And now I never will again. There are still days I forget little things, milk at the store, returning a phone call, where I left my reading glasses. But I no longer forget us. Now I pause in the middle of a busy task to ask him how his day was, and I wait for the full answer. I reach for his hand during commercials. I sit beside him without my phone in hand. These aren't dramatic changes, but they are sacred ones, intimate in the quietest way. We don't talk much about that forgotten anniversary anymore. Not because we're avoiding it, but because it served its purpose. It cracked something open in me, something that needed air and light. I often think back to the woman I was that night, standing in the kitchen in yoga pants, stew bubbling, on the stove, completely unaware of the world I was about to re-enter. A world where love had been speaking to me all along. I just hadn't been listening. Now I do. And the beauty of it is, I didn't need to become someone new. I just had to remember who I was before I got so busy surviving that I forgot to see. And I had to remember who he was too. The man who writes in journals, who notices how I hum when I fold laundry, who never needed a grand gesture to feel loved, only a presence, that was real. And now, after all these years, I've finally shown up. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever lost track of what matters most while trying to hold everything together, take a moment today to pause, to notice, to be present. Share this video with someone who might need that same reminder. Leave a comment below and tell us, what's the small act of love you've recently rediscovered? And don't forget to subscribe for more emotional, true life stories that honor quiet strength, regret, and redemption. Because sometimes, the deepest love is the one that's been beside you all along, waiting to be seen, waiting to be remembered.